Good morning. We're Team 1. My name is Raquel Bojorquez.
Alessandra Jimenez.
I'm Hani Ali Rasai.
I'm Antonio Fernandez.
And with the assistance from our sponsor, JBO, our team developed a seismocardiogram sensor that can be used for cardiac monitoring of the heart's mechanical activity in patients with coronary artery disease. The completion of this project requires many different elements, but these are a few points that we will discuss with you today. Now, we're all familiar with the prevalence of cardiovascular disease worldwide. However, were you aware that around 600,000 people die from CVD every year in the US alone? Among all, coronary artery disease has the highest mortality. This is due to the blockage of blood flow from plaque buildup in the arterial walls. Therefore, the heart tries to compensate for this extra work. The current non-invasive methods of early detection are listed in the left. However, some of these haven't transitioned to wireless devices yet. With the increasing cases of CVDs, the market of these monitoring devices is following a similar trend to decrease the chances of patients reaching critical condition. It's expected to reach about $2.94 billion by 2027. And as you can see on the top right graph, and the potential companies on the left, the US dominates this market. And we can also see in the table, the SEG dominates the method of measuring in most commercial devices. As we mentioned, heart diseases remain the leading cause of death globally, even during COVID times. Even though ECG is prominent, research is pushing towards different methods such as SEG that can provide information about other aspects of the heart. Also, some companies have begun to shift towards miniaturization or implementing soft, flexible electronics such as piezoelectric materials in their devices. So after further research, we saw that in the US, there's no commercially available devices that focuses on the heart's mechanical activity, which can be used to increase the accuracy for the physiological diagnosing of CAD. Our solution was to develop a miniaturized SEG sensor capable of recognizing these vibrational signals. The project's focus was to capture low frequencies, convert mechanical signals to electrical, and record real-time data. So we're aware of SEG and its simplicity in measuring the electrical activity of the heart. So you may be wondering why we use SEG then. We record low-frequency cardiac vibrations using this method on the chest. As seen in the figure, we can see the moments of when the valves open and close and where blood flows. Therefore, it's useful in assessing the mechanical features and anatomical structure of the heart. We developed these marker requirements and design inputs, which shows the design features of the device, such as sensing, conversion, compatibility, and placement. The current modalities we research will be addressed by Alessandra.
Thank you, Raquel. Based on our marker requirements as a team, we look into current modalities. Given the novelty in SEG, we included both commercially available devices and devices developed by research groups. As seen on the table, all modalities failed to meet at least one of our requirements, where the least met was being battery independent. These modalities vary on the placement of the device, which raises a question of where the sensor should go. The best placement is still being studied, yet the most common placement is on the sternum. Other locations are also shown. We decided on the lower part of the sternum near the apex and established a width limitation of 31.8 millimeters. With the location and requirements in mind, we developed our proposed modality, which will be a multi-layer device consisting primarily of a sensing layer and a power and data transmission layer. The overall functionality of the device is shown on the flowchart on the right. While this was our vision for the device, due to our time restriction, the team focused solely on the sensing layer. For our designs, we look into piezoelectric materials to comply with the skin Jones modulus. Our first design consists of a metallized EMFI film with a Hilbert curved pattern. However, EMFI is not sensitive to planar forces, which are vital for reading SEG signals. So we developed our second design, consisting of a metallized PVDF film with a Kirigami pattern. While PVDF is sensitive to planar forces, the pattern, which is based on origami, will compromise the compliance with the skin since it only stretches in the longitudinal direction. Therefore, our MVP design kept the metallized PVDF, but implemented a filamentary serpentine pattern, which has been proven as a stress-relieving structure, resulting in our requirements being met. Now, what do we need to pattern PVDF? Well, PVDF can have a modulus as high as 3.6 gigapascals, and our setup for skin was 20 megapascals. We can reduce its modulus by parting it, hence where the filamentary serpentine structure comes into play. The shape depends on the stated factors, and the overall steps to making a single unit are shown on the right. It is important to note that as stretchability increases, the sensitivity of the PVDF decreases. This effect can be diminished by looking at the area density, or AD, which is directly proportional to the signal-to-noise ratio, and signifies how much area is covered in the structure. The equation used in the analysis is shown below. Our first analysis was determining the most visible AD. We look into varying AD values, only changing the width and leaving the angle and radius fixed to the value shown. We performed a stress analysis simulation where the left side was fixed and a force of 1.5 newtons was applied to the boundary on the right. It was concluded that an AV of 50% showed the lowest maximum experienced stress value, while not showing any proximity or overlapping that would compromise manufacturing. We then looked into the dimensions of the sensor. The analysis used the same setting as the previous one, but compared 3 different sizes. As shown, a size of roughly 22 millimeters by 31 millimeters was within the width limitations and had the lowest maximum experienced stress value. Our next analysis looked into the varying dimensions in respect to the output voltage, which I will pass it on to Hania.
Right, thank you, Alessandra. So we wanted to know whether increasing the sensor size would improve its output voltage. In simulation, a force of 1.5 Newton per meter square was applied to the design, and observed increasing the sensor size increased its output voltage slightly. The sensor size of 22 by 31 had an output voltage of about 2.49 millivolts that satisfied our design input number 2. So after all being said, our MVP is to be a 28 micron PVDF in dimension of 22 by 31 with 50% area density and expected output voltage of 2.49 millivolts. Before our manufacturing our sample, we thought about possible challenges along the way. Our main material was an unpatterned plain PVDF that needed to be screen printed by a conductive ink and be cured at an appropriate temperature that would not affect the PVDF properties. Next, the metallized samples must be electrically functional, which means there should not be any electrical continuity from one surface to another. It's also very crucial to select an appropriate cutting machine that is capable of cutting fine details in small sizes by applying optimal force, speed, and blade depth. Since the samples are very thin, we needed to be thoughtful of removing the mesh from the rest of the film without damaging it. Lastly, the sensor needed to be substrated with a layer of adhesive compatible with skin's Young's modulus. In our manufacturing process, we prepared a screen-printed PVDF film tested for electrical functionality with a multimeter, cut the design, removed the mesh with tweezers, and tested for electrical functionality one more time. Lastly, we added copper strips on top and bottom of the sensor, then substrated it with a Tegaderm adhesive. We had multiple attempts in cutting the samples and adjusting the settings to obtain the optimal cutting settings for our MVP. So here, the first 2 samples were not electrically functional, but after cleaning the blade, we were able to get a functional sample. Even though we tried to produce more, the mesh was not coming off as smoothly as before and resulted in broken design. After multiple attempts, it seemed like the blade was becoming dull and not able to cut. So we replaced the blade, also purchased a pre-metallized PVDF with silver to save time in sample preparation and ensure it's electrically functioning. Our attempts were unsuccessful. So Mr. Garish offered his team's assistant to try and cut few samples with laser cutting technique with different settings such as speed, power, resolution, and frequency. Unfortunately, these samples were not electrically functional, possibly due to some silver residue on the edges. So after all, we need to verify our DI's specifications, which Antonio will explain.
Thank you, Hania. All right, so let's go over some of the verification process that we as a team were able to do. The first verification process to discuss is size confirmation of the patch. Fairly simple, but just as important as the other test, as we did not want our sensor to be too big. Using a simple t-test with 95% confidence, we tested 5 samples that we had cut out with the desired dimensions of 22.31 by 30.92 millimeters. Our data suggests that our samples means are not significant, and we accept that our sensors meet the design requirements. The next verification test conducted was a tensile test. The goal was to test if the device has a low enough elastic modulus, such that when a person's chest wall would move due to the heart, the device would stretch alongside the skin, reducing tension forces. Using the same t-test as before with 95% confidence, we tested a 22 by 31 size sample 4 times and had an average of 10.5 megapascals, which is sufficient for compliance with the skin. The last but most important verification test was to determine if the device was able to sense standard SCG signals. To accomplish this, we used an artificial pulse generator to stimulate vibration to the device. We decided to use a one-way ANOVA analysis as we wanted to see if our sensor was capable of detecting and sensing these vibrations in relation to SCG frequencies. With confidence levels of 95%, it was determined that the voltages generated are very significant and ultimately passed the killer test. However, we dived deeper and wanted to see if there was a correlation between the frequencies and initial amplitude set by the function generator. Using linear regression, we were able to identify a strong positive correlation between the frequency the machine operated in and the peak-to-peak voltage that was being generated. A summary of the control data we as a team collected shows that the device is very sensitive. A positive trend was also shown when increasing initial amplitude voltage from 1 millivolt to 10 millivolts. However, the system does contain a lot of noise and is very demanding to obtain accurate results. So signal processing and a better setup is required to verify the accuracy of these results. Nevertheless, this shows promise for the future of this device. Now let's take a step back and talk about the accomplishments we as a team have done these past 2 semesters.
The road towards the finish line was long and hard, but as a team, we were able to recognize the need of using SCG while designing and manufacturing a product that can detect low vibrational frequencies, and this was concluded by the success of our verification tests. So you may be asking, what's next for this? Since this area of research is relatively new, clinical trials using this method will be encouraged to gather clinical significance. Overall, we envision this sensor to be capable of measuring both SCG and ECG data, which can definitely provide a complete picture of the heart's conditions. We'd like to take this time to acknowledge and thank our sponsor, Jabil, and those who helped our team in completing this successful project. These are our references. And as a team, we thank you for your attention and look forward to hearing your questions.